What if your brain has been trying to warn you for years? Not with intense pain, not with something dramatic that would justify an urgent medical appointment, that would force a conversation nobody wants to have, that would make it impossible to keep ignoring, but with something far more silent, far more subtle, far easier to rationalize, to minimize, to push under the rug of a busy life. Small signs, repeated, almost ignorable, until the moment they stop being. A name that disappears. Not the name of a stranger, not something you never knew well, but the name of someone close, someone you live with, someone you've spoken to hundreds of times, and it simply doesn't appear when you need it. An appointment forgotten that you were certain you'd remember. An unexpected difficulty concentrating on a task that used to be automatic. That growing, diffuse feeling that the mind no longer responds with the same agility, the same confidence, the same presence it once had. Many people learn to live with this. They develop compensation strategies so efficient that others don't even notice. They write down things they used to simply remember. They check and recheck information they used to access with confidence. They smile at the right moments and change the subject at the wrong ones. They build an appearance of normalcy so convincing that, for a while, they even manage to convince themselves. And alongside that coexistence comes a belief that installs itself silently. This is permanent. It's part of aging. There's not much to be done. But the truth is more uncomfortable, and at the same time more hopeful, than that narrative of resignation makes it appear. In most cases, this doesn't arise overnight. There is no specific moment, no marked date, no singular event you can point to as the turning point. What exists is an accumulation, a process that began long before the first visible signs, that was built in layers over years, that used the most common daily choices as building material. Years of poorly slept nights, not necessarily severe insomnia, but superficial sleep, interrupted cycles, deep phases that never quite arrived. Nights when the brain's glymphatic system, the mechanism that removes metabolic waste accumulated throughout the day, operated at a fraction of its capacity. Nights when memory consolidation was compromised because the necessary cycles weren't completed. Nutrition poor in the specific nutrients the brain needs to manufacture the chemical messengers that sustain memory, attention, processing speed, and clarity of thought. Not necessarily an obviously bad diet, but chronically deficient in the elements that neural tissue most needs. Constant stress that kept cortisol elevated long enough to compromise critical brain structures, especially the hippocampus, the region most directly associated with forming new memories, which is particularly vulnerable to the neurotoxic effects of chronic cortisol. Lack of genuine cognitive stimulation, not passive entertainment, not content consumption, but the kind of challenge that forces the brain to create new connections, to recruit different neural networks, to remain in the state of plasticity that protects it against decline. Routines that wear the system down without offering what it needs to recover. And then, gradually, the mind starts to fail. Not abruptly, which would be easier to identify, easier to take seriously, easier to motivate change around, but gradually enough to be constantly rationalized, minimized, attributed to temporary causes that never really go away. Enough to generate a feeling that becomes increasingly familiar and increasingly anguishing. The feeling of losing control of your own thoughts. And alongside that feeling come pains far deeper than the cognitive inconvenience itself. The fear of depending on other people, not in some distant abstract future, but in a near and very concrete one, of reaching the point where tasks that were always completely automatic begin to require supervision, assistance, The constant presence of someone who ensures that everything will go right. The growing insecurity around making simple decisions. Not the great life decisions. Those always require deliberation. But the small ones, the daily ones, the ones that used to be instantaneous. The hesitation that appears where there used to be certainty. The need to verify where there used to be confidence. The frustration of no longer trusting your own memory. Of needing external systems to store what the mind used to hold effortlessly. Of becoming dependent on notes, alarms, other people for functions that should be internal and automatic. And underneath all of that, underneath the practical frustration and the fear of the future, there is something even deeper and harder to articulate. The feeling that identity is beginning to slip away. Because memory isn't just cognitive function, it's continuity. It's the thread that connects who you were to who you are. It's the archive of the stories you tell, the people you recognize, the experiences that shape how you see the world. When it starts failing, it isn't just information that's lost. It's part of the feeling of being yourself. It was exactly from the understanding of these causes, and of which specific nutrient the brain is most urgently asking for when it's in deficit, that researchers identified a simple, accessible, and widely overlooked food that can make a real difference. You'll find it at the first link in the description. But here's the point almost nobody talks about clearly enough. The brain rarely gives up without first asking for help. Those signs we described, the forgetting, the difficulty focusing, the slowness of thought, the mental fog, aren't the brain failing out of incompetence. They're the brain communicating, the only way it can, that something in the environment created for it isn't working as it should. They are requests for help. And very often, what it needs isn't something complex. Not a sophisticated medical intervention, not an expensive supplement with impossible promises, not a protocol demanding radical lifestyle transformation. It's something basic that has been neglected for too long. That's exactly how something simple began drawing growing attention from researchers and brain nutrition specialists. Not an exotic superfood imported from somewhere remote, not an ingredient available only in specialty stores or that costs a fortune, not a solution that demands specialized knowledge to incorporate into a routine. Eggs. Yes, something completely ordinary. Present in many people's routines. Widely available, widely accessible, widely consumed, and widely underestimated when it comes to brain health. The reason eggs deserve specific attention in this context begins with a nutrient that most people have never heard about with the frequency they should. Choline. Choline is the direct precursor to acetylcholine, one of the most critical neurotransmitters for human cognitive function. Acetylcholine isn't just one neurotransmitter among many. It is the neurotransmitter most directly associated with memory and learning. It is released in hippocampal circuits during the formation of new memories. It regulates attention and the capacity to maintain sustained focus. It participates in the mental processing that differentiates fast, clear thinking from slow, foggy thinking. And it is the neurotransmitter that certain neurodegenerative conditions compromise earliest and most severely, which isn't coincidence, but evidence of how central acetylcholine is to human cognitive architecture. The problem is that acetylcholine production depends directly on the availability of choline in the body. The brain cannot manufacture acetylcholine from nothing. It needs choline as raw material. And when that raw material is lacking, when the diet doesn't consistently provide enough choline, acetylcholine production is compromised. 2 whole eggs provide more than 250 milligrams of choline, more than half of the adequate daily intake for adults. in whole food form with the bioavailability and cofactor matrix that maximize absorption and utilization of this nutrient. But choline is only the beginning of what eggs offer the brain. The second critical component is lutein and zeaxanthin. These two carotenoids, present in notable concentrations in egg yolk, were for a long time studied exclusively for their role in eye health. But more recent research identified something that shifted the perspective. They accumulate selectively in the cerebral cortex and hippocampus. Neuroimaging studies showed positive correlations between serum lutein levels and the integrity of cerebral white matter, the communication structures that connect different regions of the brain. And white matter integrity is directly associated with processing speed, working memory, and executive function. The third component is B-complex vitamins, especially B12, B6, and folate. These vitamins are essential for multiple processes critical to brain health. B12 is necessary for maintaining the myelin sheath, the structure that surrounds and protects nerve fibers and enables efficient electrical signal transmission. B6 is an essential cofactor for the synthesis of serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. Folate participates in the regulation of homocysteine, whose elevated levels are strongly associated with cerebral vascular damage and accelerated cognitive decline. B12 deficiency, specifically, is one of the most common and most frequently overlooked causes of cognitive impairment in older adults, manifesting with exactly the symptoms we're describing: mental slowness, memory problems, difficulty concentrating. The fourth element is the healthy fats in the yolk. Egg yolk contains fatty acids that are structural components of neural membranes. The fluidity of those membranes, which directly influences the efficiency of synaptic transmission, depends on the continuous availability of these fatty acids. And the yolk provides these lipids in a form that the body recognizes and uses with an efficiency that isolated supplements frequently cannot replicate. And the fifth component is high-quality protein. The brain needs amino acids to synthesize neurotransmitters. Tryptophan, serotonin's precursor, tyrosine, dopamine's precursor, and other essential amino acids are present in eggs in an amino acid profile considered one of the most complete and most bioavailable in the human diet. Not magic, biology. A food that contains, in a highly integrated natural matrix, multiple compounds the brain needs to function well, and that most people are not providing in adequate quantities. But there is an emotional dimension of this story that needs to be told honestly, because what people experience when memory begins failing isn't just cognitive inconvenience. It's an experience that deeply alters the way they relate to themselves and the world around them. Forgetting important commitments. Those involving the people you love, the responsibilities you assumed, the events that carry real meaning, generates a shame that is difficult to name, but that anyone who has lived through it recognizes immediately. It isn't just a practical inconvenience. It's the public evidence of a limitation you'd prefer nobody knew about, repeating stories without realizing it. Telling the same person, in the same conversation, something already told. Noticing the kindness with which people pretend to hear it for the first time, and knowing they're pretending. Feeling that wave of silent mortification. Losing the thread of reasoning mid-task, not for lack of effort, but because the thread simply vanishes before you can reach it. This set of experiences generates anxiety. And anxiety, with the cortisol increase it brings, actively compromises the formation of new memories, which generates more failures, which generate more anxiety, which generate more cortisol. It's a silent, cruel cycle that most people never manage to name precisely, and that, precisely because of this, continues self-perpetuating. But the brain doesn't need miraculous solutions to start breaking out of that cycle. It needs consistency, a favorable environment, the nutrients it has been asking for and that haven't been arriving in sufficient quantity. Neuroplasticity, the adult brain's capacity to create new synaptic connections, reorganize neural roots, and respond positively to adequate stimulation, isn't an empty promise or a motivational concept without foundation. It's a phenomenon documented in neuroimaging studies, observable in MRI images, replicable across populations of all ages, including people in their 80s. What it means in practice is that even after years of accumulated wear, even after years of poor sleep, inadequate nutrition, chronic stress, and nutritional deficits, the neural system still retains the capacity to adapt, strengthen connections, and improve performance when it finds the right environment. There is still time. There is still a path, and that path begins with something far simpler than most people imagine. Consistently including eggs in the diet, not as an isolated solution but as part of a broader approach that addresses the multiple causes of cognitive decline, is a real, accessible step with documented mechanisms of action. 2 eggs at breakfast, prepared in a way that preserves the integrity of the yolk, soft scrambled over low heat, poached, soft-boiled with the yolk still slightly liquid, to maximize the bioavailability of the phospholipids and carotenoids the yolk contains. Combined with sleep that respects the natural cycles of neural recovery and cleaning. With physical movement that stimulates BDNF and improves cerebral circulation. With genuine cognitive stimulation that keeps the brain in the state of plasticity that protects it. With stress management that removes the toxicity of chronic cortisol on the hippocampus. Every element is a signal sent to the system, and the system, given the right set of signals with the right consistency, responds. Not magically, not overnight, but really progressively, and for those inside the process, surprisingly perceptibly. If you want to start this process today, understanding how to incorporate eggs strategically and combine them with the other pillars that actually work, what researchers have isolated about this approach is available at the first link in the description, as simple as it always should have been. If you feel that your memory is failing, that your concentration isn't what it used to be, that confidence in your own mind has diminished, know this clearly. You don't have to accept this as your destiny. It isn't inevitable. It isn't irreversible. It isn't the inescapable result of simply having more years of life. It's the result of an environment that isn't providing the brain with what it needs. And environments can be changed. There is a natural, accessible, evidence-based method for recovering focus, strengthening memory, and trusting your own mind again every day. This isn't about erasing the past. This isn't about undoing years of inadequate habits all at once. It's about acting now, with what is within reach, with what is simple, with what is consistent. About giving the brain the support it has been asking for years. And perhaps the change you're looking for begins with something far simpler than you imagined. The complete method is in the pinned comment. And if this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel. In the upcoming videos, I'll keep showing you natural and intelligent strategies to recover mental clarity, protect memory, and live with more presence, security, and hope every single day.